We are pleased to sponsor tonight's debate in partnership with the Casper Star-Tribune for the candidates for Wyoming governor. It is my pleasure to introduce these four candidates. They will be introduced and seated from the audience's left and to right in alphabetical order. First will be the Libertarian candidate, D. Cousins. Mr. Cousins? Next, please make welcome Democratic candidate Pete Gosar. Next, please make welcome Republican candidate Governor Matt Mead. Our fourth candidate, please make welcome Independent candidate Don Wills. Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen. I will now turn this evening's event over to our moderator, Jason Adrians, editor of the Casper Star-Tribune. Jason?
Good evening, and welcome to the 2014 general election gubernatorial debate sponsored by Casper College and the Casper Star-Tribune. This evening's debate will feature the following components. All four candidates will have the opportunity to shall not exceed 2 minutes in length. After the opening statements, the candidates will answer questions from the Casper Star-Tribune editorial board and readers of the Casper Star-Tribune on energy and economy, the legislature, education, and other topics of interest. The candidate who receives a question will not have more than 2 minutes to respond, and the other candidates will have 1 minute for a response or a rebuttal. Questions will alternate between the four candidates. After the initial question and answer period, we'll ask each candidate one follow-up question. The candidate will have no more than 2 minutes to respond, and the other candidates will have the opportunity for a 30-second rebuttal. The debate will conclude with each candidate having the opportunity to make a closing statement that again shall not exceed 2 minutes in length. As we progress through the debate tonight, members of the audience are encouraged to use the pens and paper available to them and write down possible follow-up questions based on things the candidates have said this evening. If you have a follow-up question ready, please raise your hand and an usher will come collect it for you. Once again, we appreciate you holding your applause until the end of the event this evening. Also, please remember to be respectful of the candidates who have chosen to participate tonight. Based on results of a pre-debate lottery, Governor Mead will make the first opening statement of the night. Governor Mead, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason, and thank all the event organizers. Thank all of you who are here tonight. We appreciate this opportunity, and for those who are following live stream, we certainly appreciate that as well. A little bit about my background. I'm a fourth generation Wyoming citizen. My great-grandparents homesteaded in Teton County. They were ranchers. My grandparents were ranchers. My mom and dad were ranchers. And Carol and I, before we got into politics, were in the ranching business as well. And I've worked all my life. When I got out of law school at the University of Wyoming, I went to the county attorney's office in Campbell County. From there, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I was appointed as U.S. Attorney by George Bush. The reason I mention that is I think experience and background for the role of governor makes a big difference. In my role as U.S. Attorney, before I became governor, I had an office. I was able to manage that office in the right way, I believe, and that served me in my role as governor. And when I took over as governor, all those experiences combined have put Wyoming in a good place. We have the second fastest growing GDP in the country. We're the second most business-friendly state in the country. We have the lowest poverty rate amongst our children. We are the state that is recognized year in and year out as a state that is moving forward. And in fact, we've been recognized by Wall Street 24/7 as the first or second best run state in the country. We've been conservative, but we've been able to build Wyoming. And I'm proud of that record. And I can tell you that there's many challenges in being governor, but there's many rewards as well. As I travel the state, driving up here today from Cheyenne, in this wonderful weather. It reminds me how blessed we are to live in this beautiful state with wide open spaces, with the opportunities that so many of our citizens have. We know there's challenges ahead, and I'm the best one prepared to take on those challenges. So thank you again, all of you, tonight for being here and giving all of us this opportunity.
Mr. Gosar.
Good evening. My name is Pete Gosar, and I would like to be the next governor of the state of Wyoming. And as I look out over the crowd, I can already hear that ex-UW football coach screaming, "Gosar, get in," and try not to mess it up. Well, I'll try not to get that messed up, but I have some thank yous to say. So I'd like to thank the Casper Star-Tribune and Casper College for hosting this event. I'd like to thank the people here in the crowd and online. It's important. I'd like to thank my competitors and our moderator, Mr. Adrians. This is a wonderful opportunity for me. But most of all, I'd like to thank the people of Wyoming who have brought me into their homes and told me their stories. You have made politics personal for me. The courage that you've shown as you faced your cancer without insurance was remarkable. And I have learned compassion as you prepared your disabled child for the day. I understand the toughness that it requires to take your arthritic hands through another day. And I cannot tell you how much it means to watch the conviction flash across your eyes as you detail your stories of inequality. You have most of all taught me about leadership, a leadership that is sorely lacking in Wyoming today, a leadership that would never put ideology over integrity, expediency over decency. There are two sets of rules in Wyoming today, one for the well-connected and another for the rest of us. But there is a vast wealth of talent in Wyoming, and there is a different road to choose. I'm excited about moving towards the future, and future generations are waiting for us to act.
Mr. Wills.
Thank you, Jason. I want to thank Casper College and Jason for inviting all four of the candidates tonight. This is a situation where I was not originally invited because typically the minor parties and the independents are not considered viable candidates. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight, I am a viable candidate. I want to be your next governor. I think I'm well qualified for that position. I'm a small businessman. I'm not a lawyer. I have built a business. I'm a computer programmer by trade, but a businessman by nature. I've hired and fired probably 250 people in my life. I understand what it means to make a payroll, and that's a big deal. I don't know the backgrounds of all the other people on this stage, but I know I could be a great governor. Quite frankly, there isn't a whole lot of difference between my two major party candidates. Governor Meade and Pete Gosar are both in favor of Common Core. I will stop Common Core. Governor Meade and Pete Gosar are both either on the fence or in favor of Medicaid expansion. I am absolutely opposed to taking away your vote for Superintendent of Public Instruction. I don't know if you know this, but there is a movement afoot in the legislature to introduce a constitutional amendment to make the Director of Education be an appointed position. I will oppose that because I think that what the powers that be in this state did to Cindy Hill through SF 104 was awful. It was absolutely unconstitutional and unconscionable. I will work with the legislature to cut spending, and I will work with the legislature to make sure that the federal government does not interfere with the operations of the state of Wyoming. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cousins.
Boy, these are hard acts to follow, by the way. But anyway, my name is D. Cousins. I'm from the Bighorn Basin, Bighorn County specifically. After college, I landed a job with the Pfizer Corporation, a pharmaceutical firm, and I sold pharmaceuticals throughout northern Wyoming and southern Montana, and met many of the physicians that are still, some of them are still living. After that, I landed a job with a hospital and became a chief executive officer of a small hospital, and during that time, we added on 30 additional beds to the facility for long-term care. Cody invited me over to interview for their hospital. The doctors did, by the way. And I went over, and they selected me to be the administrator or the CEO of their hospital for about 6 years. At that time, they were having some employee problems, and I said, has anyone ever talked to these employees? They happened to be nurses whom I love, and no one had. So we sat down and discussed the issues and found out that some of the problems that they had were easily resolved. From there, I took a job with Wytex Corporation out of Cody. That's an international company as well as a domestic company. I was the director of marketing, and I've traveled throughout the whole world and speak fluent Spanish. It's hard for me sometimes when I get excited to speak English because I speak Spanish too. So overall, with my administrative background, dealing with all the governmental agencies I've dealt with and with the state of Wyoming, I think that I really bring a lot to the plate to be your governor. I don't want to be your ruler. I want to be your leader. You don't have to campaign for me. You don't have to recognize me in public if you don't want to. But when you're in the voting booth, it's between you and him. And vote for me.
Thank you. And Governor Meade, the first question of the night is for you. Tell us about Wyoming's economy 20 years from now. What should it look like? And as governor, what will you do to get Wyoming there?
I'm sorry, was that for me? I didn't hear it.
Yes, Governor
Okay.
Meade.
Okay, thank you. Well, here's how I think Wyoming's economy should look. In some ways, much the way it should now, where we have the second fastest growing GDP. We have unemployment at about 4%. We continue to have a strong energy sector, strong tourism, strong ag, and great small business across the state of Wyoming. But I think the challenge for Wyoming and what we've been working on is we know that we need to diversify our economy. We need to do that because in all the main industries, there's certainly ups and downs depending upon what's going on in the country and around the world. We see that particularly with minerals, and when so much of our money comes from minerals, when there's a downturn, it has a detrimental effect across our state. And so what diversifying does is it helps with those highs and lows, but importantly, equally importantly, what it does is it provides more opportunities for our young people, more choices for our young people. As they see Wyoming and think about the opportunity to be here, raise their family here, we want to provide them those opportunities for different types of jobs. And in Wyoming, what we have done and will continue to do is diversify, in particular with manufacturing and technology. And so 20 years from now, I certainly would like to see the diversity that we have started, but I'd also like to say, you know, we still have the tried and true, our minerals, our tourism and ag that have served us all so well, our great small businesses that have served us all so well. We can reach there, there's no question about it. Just in the last three and a half years, we've seen the diversity. We've led the nation in terms of the average on increasing manufacturing jobs. 2 years ago, or last year rather, we were 7th fastest increase in international exports. So Wyoming has the ability to do this. We are a small state in terms of numbers, but we are very strong in terms of where our future can grow. So 20 years from now, I want to see us continue to have one of the lowest unemployment rates, one of the fastest growing GDPs. That's where we are today, and certainly that's where we can be for 20 years from now, along with much more diversified economy.
Mr. Gosar, your rebuttal.
Well, I believe that what the governor says is correct. However, actions speak louder than words, and we're no more meaningfully diversified today than we were 4 years ago. We have to look for the future. And just this last month, the Tesla Gigafactory was dropped out, and we did not even compete. We have the largest lithium deposit in America. We have soda ash right next door, and those two components make lithium-ion battery factory. And you cannot help but understand that that is the future of Wyoming. And we need to diversify our energy portfolio. I agree with the governor, but we never talk about energy conservation. We never talk about the negawatt. We never talk about how we produce those electrons that we sell across the border. It really does matter. And I think it's one thing to talk nice, but it's another thing to put actions behind your words. And I think if you look at the last 4 years, that has not been done.
Mr. Wills.
I agree. Diversification is a very good thing, and if we go in the right direction and do the right things today and in the next decade, that 20 years from now, the economy of Wyoming will look very different. However, I have a fundamental disagreement with the approach that Governor Meade is advocating, which is a top-down, government-driven, subsidy-driven, picking favorites type of incitement for companies to move here. Good example is Microsoft. Microsoft set up a data center in Cheyenne, and one of the primary reasons is because they got a complete tax abatement for all computers that they buy for that data center. I'm a small businessman in the computer field. I still pay the sales tax. That's not fair. If we could level the playing field with lower taxes and less regulation, we could diversify the economy, but it wouldn't be driven by government, it would be driven by the free market.
Mr. Cousins.
20 years from now, that's a long time, isn't it, Matt? I think we need to focus on what's happening right now to build the base for that which is going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years. And one of the critical things that we're concerned about right now is the EPA's intrusion upon some of our industries, particularly the coal. Coal is so important to us. If we were able to develop all of our resources in the state of Wyoming, we would be the most potent, strong state and nation in the world. If you have the energy, you have everything. We all know that, okay? One of the major concerns I can see right now is our failure in Oregon to not encourage them to dredge the Columbia River deeper so we can use larger ships to come in and export our coal. Perhaps you didn't know, but in the United States, there's not one port on the western coast that exports coal. We have to send it through Canada.
Thank you.
Boy, that minute goes fast.
Mr. Gosar, the next question is for you. What is your strategy to ensure the Game and Fish Department is properly funded, and what does properly funded actually mean to you?
Well, as a lifetime hunter and fisherman, the game and fish is really important. Habitat, access, hunter safety programs, and education programs should all be funded. We have the revenue existing today to adequately fund game and fish. It's the backbone of our #2 industry, and 3 of our 4 major herds are in decline. To cut research dollars, to cut habitat dollars, to cut access and programs is unconscionable. We have to find a way forward. We have to use research. We have whirling disease and CWD that are finding their way further west and further north. We have to find a way to make that important. We have to return to the Wildlife Heritage Expo that was so instrumental in people's lives in Casper and students' lives in Casper. Some people don't have that opportunity that I had growing up in the western part of the state. They don't have parents taking them out. They don't have access to public lands. It's important that the game and fish be funded. And it's important that the governor's office lead that charge, because it will not be funded. It will not be a priority without top-down discussions. We need to go out and say to our folks, you know, game and fish is important. Habitat is important. And you all have a vested interest in it. If there needs to be a funding mechanism, we swept in $440 million in the last general budget. Certainly, we can fund game and fish. Certainly, it's important enough for us to ensure the future of our hunting and fishing for future generations. It's just too important, and to see what was done in the last biennium is unbelievably difficult to watch. To have to ask now to move their benefits to the general fund without having that done right away is really silly, and it's dangerous to our second biggest industry.
Mr. Wills, your rebuttal.
You need to look at the question as it was asked. The question was asked in a manner that essentially is setting up a increase in hunting and fishing fees for you, the hunters and fishermen in the state. The reality is that Game and Fish has plenty of money, and actually if you look at their actual expenditures, they were $76 million in the previous year, and they're $79 million this year. That's not a decrease. They aren't hurting for money. They're doing just fine. They actually have plenty of staff to do all of the things that they have on their plate to accomplish. And quite frankly, with all of that money that they're doing, they really aren't doing that great of a job of managing the wildlife herds, which if you're a hunter, you know they are way down in many parts of this state. So Game and Fish needs to be turned upside down, needs somebody from the outside to come in and clean house.
Mr. Cousins.
Are you going to have a wolf question later? Because if not, then I'd like to deal with it now. Is there a wolf question later?
What's that?
Is there a wolf question later?
We'll see.
Fish and game is very, very traditional in the state of Wyoming. If you have any sympathy at all for our wild animals and our wildlife, you'll appreciate what they have done. I do appreciate them in the fact that they've kept our streams fishable, that they plant fish. I'm appreciative of them for the unnecessary law enforcement that they have to sometimes tackle. I think we could cooperate more closely with our county sheriffs and perhaps relieve the fish and game folks of having to do the law enforcement portion of their duties. And that would remove a little bit of danger from their job, because it is a dangerous job. Overall, we need to continue to fund the fish and game. There are monies, there are ways that we can juggle back and forth to take care of that.
Governor Mead.
Well, for those who are paying attention, in my last State of the State address, I took on a theme that Wyoming tourism has, which is Wyoming wildlife is worth the watching. And I said in my State of the State, if Wyoming wildlife is worth the watching, it's worth the funding. And that's why I asked for about $20 million more. We have about $20 million more general funding for the game and fish than we did when I started. So it has been robust. It is true, when we took cuts as the budget was reduced, the game and fish took 2% cuts. As an example, I recommended 10% cuts for my office. But last session, I was able to ask for more general fund dollars for the game and fish, because it is important. It's critical. And on top of that, we have the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust, which I've continued to fund. I've added about $12.5 million to that. Because when it comes to wildlife, it is not just the sportsmen. All of us benefit from wildlife. Tourism, artists, all of us benefit from wildlife, and it adds to our quality of life. So my view on that is, it is worth the funding, and I have done it.
Thank you. Mr. Wills, the next question is for you. The incoming legislature includes a far-right contingent in the House and a strong, active leadership in both houses. What would be your approach with lawmakers to advocate for issues and budget items that are most important to you?
That's a great question. The situation in the Republican Party in the state of Wyoming is that there are two factions that are fighting with each other. There's the progressive faction that is the good old boy network that basically funds all of the contractors and all of the projects that have been historically funded. And then there is, and I hate to use the word because Tea Party is really a pejorative, and I'm not a Tea Party person, but there's a group of, as Jason calls them, right-wing activists. Well, I look at them as frugal conservatives, and there's probably 10 to 12 of them. What's interesting is the leadership is the progressive wing of the Republican Party. There's about 10 House members that are the frugal conservative wing, but there's 40 people in the middle, 40 House members in the middle, and they are willing to listen. And it's right in the middle there that I think I can work with many of those legislators, and I know many of them. I live in Laramie County. I go to the legislative sessions. I know how the things work at least a little bit from the outside. The reality is that these middle legislators are interested in saving money. They know that our country's in trouble, and they know that our state is running on a sugar high now from the money that we're getting from mineral royalties and so on and so forth, and that we have to be worried in the future about decreasing revenues, and we have to either figure out how to deal with that decreasing revenues, or we're going to be in big trouble. So the reality is, I think that there is a very willing contingent, a majority in the House that is very willing to work with an independent, which I am. I'm not a part of the Good Old Boy Network, and I can make some inroads and actually make some changes and cut some funding for those programs that are truly extravagant and unneeded.
Mr. Cousins, your rebuttal.
You want to rephrase the question?
Phrase it, but I can reread it for you.
Thank you.
The incoming legislature includes a far-right contingent in the House and strong active leadership in both houses. What would be your approach with lawmakers to advocate for issues and budget items that are most important to you?
Well, I believe that the legislature works feverishly to put together a budget. And I've gone through the budget. It's about 121 pages. I think it's, $4.5 billion a year. 8 billion in 2 years. But I find that there's a process that takes place after the budget has been approved. And I think it's disheartening to some of our legislators that they put this budget in place, but then suddenly it's not used in those areas. It's called the B11 process. It's reviewed by a group. The governor looks at it. In other states, the governor and a committee, the Appropriations Committee, look at it before they pass the funds around. I think if you stick to a pretty close budget, which I have experience with, that I think that'll resolve a lot of the issues that are involved with maybe the disagreements that we have in the legislature.
Governor Meade.
You know, the nature of passing a budget, certainly there is disagreements in the House and the disagreements in the Senate, but I don't think that is necessarily unhealthy. Anytime you sign off on a budget, a member of the legislature, you know, there is so much in there. There's going to be things you agree with more or less than other things. And I don't think that it's inappropriate for there to be a tension in the House or the Senate, because I think that works well. And then, of course, I'm the one who presents the budget to the legislature and my proposal. And they have a chance to review that, accept what I say or not accept what I say, and then I have the opportunity for line item vetoes, which I have used. And so when I hear this, you know, as has been said over time, you know, this good old boy thing, you know, the fact is there's great men and women who serve in the legislature, and they have different points of view, and that's okay. They go down there to serve the state of Wyoming, and I agree and disagree and sometimes very strongly with all or some of them. But I think that is the process that we have. I think it's important to celebrate those differences in the budget process.
Mr. Gosar.
Well, I think it's important that you buy them dinner. And then you do what you do with most people when you're sitting at a table to negotiate. You come with your ideas and your reasons for believing. And then you honestly take your position and you say, let's sit down. Let's talk about it. This is important. I think what we've recognized in the last 4 years are what happens when there's no checks and balances of the system. You get budget footnotes that censor science. And that's not what the budget process is about. And so I think that you have to look a person in the eye and you say, you know, this is my position. It hasn't been poll tested. It hasn't been run through Gillette and changed in Laramie and then further changed in Jackson. This is me. This is why I think the way I think. But I'm not unworkable. I can negotiate with folks, and I think that that's the beauty of government. It's about compromise. And as a Democrat in Wyoming, you understand a compromise. Thank you.
Before we get to the next question, I just want to remind the audience that if you have a follow-up question for any of the four candidates, and please direct them specifically to one candidate, just raise your hand and the usher will come and take it from you. Thank you. And Mr. Cousins, the next question is for you. What would you consider to be a highlight of the current Meade administration? And also, what would you consider to be a missed opportunity during the Meade administration? You must answer both.
The highlight for Matt, I mean, he's a friendly, he's represented us well throughout the state. And he's got a great family, a great family. The low aspects of what has happened, I think that his party has been divided over an issue that really was an obsolete issue to begin with. Common Core is obsolete, people. It's been obsolete for some time. My 12-year-old son can take out his iPhone or take his iPad, and he can ask questions and answer questions for his teacher even before it's presented in the classroom. Common Core is good for the commoners. It may be good to bring up folks to the level of scholastic excellence that some people expect. We expect more from our children, and irregardless of whether we give it to them through a Common Core setup or not, they're still going to go with the iPhone and the iPads, and they're way ahead of us, guys. So to me, the low point was the division that occurred on the Common Core issue. It should not have even gone. It should not have gone that far. I still got 46 seconds, guys. I was concerned, too, that the National Republican Committee met in Los Angeles in May of 2013. They went on record as opposing, vetoing the Common Core program. And if you look that resolution up, it even details as to why they think it was bad. Then the Wyoming Republican Committee met, and they copied or basically voted and approved the same resolution that the National Committee did. Why we went against the National Committee is beyond me.
Governor Mead, your rebuttal.
This is an odd question. What I like about it, I like Dee's first part of his answer pretty well. That was nice. Thank you, Dee. What I think we've been very strong in moving the state forward on the economy. I've talked about that, but we've also addressed issues such as, a 10-year plan to address homelessness. We've addressed issues like suicide in our state. We've tried to address issues from workforce safety to highway fatalities. And, just last year we had the fewest highway fatalities in the state since World War II. These are things we work on that sometimes don't get a lot of press. And so I'm going to stick with the high points, but I will tell you this, that every day there is challenges, and the challenge needs to be turned into an opportunity. And I believe that we've worked hard to do that. And it's not by myself. We have great representation in the legislature. We have a great private sector out there working day in and day out. But if you see where Wyoming has come in the 4 years, from around 7% unemployment to about 4% unemployment, we've moved Wyoming forward. We've diversified our economy. We're building a unified network which will allow us an internet standard that will be unmatched in the West. These are the things that we've been working on, and I view all those as high points.
Mr. Gosar.
Does that mean that Governor Mead's dodging the question?
No.
Well, I would think that the broadband access sets the stage for what I'd like to do starting in January. And so I think that's a highlight. Medicaid expansion certainly is a low light. 18,000 working folks without health care access. $87 million we've turned down since January 1st today. Hospitals and healthcare facilities in danger of closing their doors. Now, if that's not something, I don't know what is. I have not heard one reasonable excuse. I've heard we don't feel like the federal government will be good on their end of the bargain. Well, we don't say that about highway funds, and we don't say that about education funds. And it's surprising to me when it comes to a person's health care that all of a sudden we get a little worried. Well, I think that could have been taken care of with a triggering mechanism or a one-year expansion. And it just didn't happen. And that low light is continuing to haunt us and will haunt us yet.
Mr. Wills.
I'm glad I got to be the last on this response because it took a while for me to think about the highlight. The highlight was, and I'm not sure how supportive he was, but Governor Mead did sign the license-free concealed carry bill. So I applaud Governor Mead for following through with his rhetoric of gun laws. The lowlights, obviously, I'm surprised nobody's mentioned this, is SF 104. I was in the legislature the day that it was introduced, and it was a travesty, folks. It hadn't been talked about, and the leadership of the Senate and House showed up with a binder that was 4 inches thick that had all of the words. There was dozens and dozens of pages of this stuff, and they jammed it through in 3 days in the House, in 3 days in the Senate, and Governor Meade signed it on the 7th day, and unlike all other bills which take effect July 1st following the session, this bill took effect the next day. That was a travesty.
Thank you. Just a final reminder to our audience members tonight, if you do have a follow-up question for one of the candidates, please write it down on one of the pieces of paper you grabbed on the way in, raise your hand, and an usher will come pick it up for you. And Governor Meade, the next question is for you, and it's a two-parter. What should be done to bring stability to the state's education goals, and what should the should the superintendent of public instruction be elected or appointed?
Well, first of all, on the stability is absolutely critical for our state. Year in and year out, we spend about as much or more than any other state in terms of education. It's about a little over $4 million every single day of the year. We have been fortunate. We've had a legislature and previous governors and myself who are committed to education. But we have to have a vision going forward. And I think what has been challenging, particularly for teachers, for parents, and for students, is that every couple of years or every 3 or 4 years, we completely change course and where we're going to go. We do need that stability. And one of the areas where I have worked is with the University of Wyoming and the community colleges. And Rich Crandall, was when he was at the Department of Education, saying, listen, we have got to have a plan here of where we are and where we're going to go. We need to have excellence across the board in our schools. And I'm convinced we have the teachers and administrators to do it. We're demanding accountability of our schools. We're demanding accountability in our students. In order to do that, we have to be accountable at the state level. We have to have a stability at the Department of Education. Obviously, if there's going to be a change in the Department of Education and how it's run, that's going to take a constitutional amendment to do that. But whether we do that or not, we have to have professional people at the Department of Education who are committed to a long-term vision that works for and meets the needs of our students and parents across the state. We have the funding to do it. We have the determination to do it. We just have not had the vision to do it.
Mr. Gosar.
Well, I think the stability of the Education Department is something that we're concerned about at the State Board of Education. And I think that starts by having a strong executive and putting curtailments on some of the legislative micromanaging of the education system. I think when you censor what can be learned, you have headed down a tough road. And so I would like to see that happen at the state, have a governor who steps in and says, you know, you've gone a little too far, this is some micromanaging, you might want to stop. Should the superintendent of public instruction be elected? Well, I hesitate to change the Constitution unless there's a really good reason. I think it would be difficult to not have the voice of education on the SLIB board and some of the other boards, because sometimes economics and education, they're mutually exclusive, and it's sometimes necessary to have that voice at the table. So until I heard a reasonable and compelling reason to change the Constitution, I would not be in favor.
Mr. Wills.
You'll notice that Governor Meade didn't answer the second question as to whether he's in favor or against the election of the superintendent. I am absolutely opposed to changing the Constitution in this regard. The superintendent should be an elected position. We need somebody who is separately accountable to the voters. And if you don't like how he or she is doing the job, you vote him out. That's the right way to do it. SF 104 was the wrong way. So the answer to the question is yes, we need stability, but we need stability in the sense that we need to know that the superintendent of public instruction is going to be the elected head of the Department of Education. And so the question is kind of loaded, because if the answer is yes, I want to turn the director into a appointed position, appointed by the governor, then you're not going to have stability. It's going to be a nightmare for the transition time. Just as an aside, there's going to be a push to make the Attorney General be elected, and I am absolutely in favor of that constitutional amendment.
Mr. Cousins.
Definitely we should elect someone to that position. How to improve the educational system in the state of Wyoming. Keep it as close as we possibly can to a local level with your boards. selection of teachers and that. Some of our teachers are frustrated because they feel like they're just being facilitators. They're given manuals to follow, and this is the curriculum, and et cetera. My understanding is that you don't have to put a lesson plan together much anymore. Is that correct? I wasn't a teacher, but that's what they used to tell me. Education is so very, very important. So important that there are laws on the books, federal laws that say that the federal government will not stick its hands or feet or anything else into the curriculums of the local schools. Look it up for yourself. It's section 20-something, but Google it. You'll find it.
Thank you. Mr. Gosar, the next question is for you. Should gay marriage be legalized in Wyoming, and what's the state's next move in light of the Supreme Court's decision on Monday?
Well, thank you, and it's an apropos question. I'm a supporter of marriage for all of Wyoming families because the United States Constitution and the Wyoming Constitution are clear. The 14th Amendment says and guarantees equal protection under the law. And right now, if you look at the statistics, 41 federal, state, and federal appeals victories since June of 2013, 2 in opposition. As a governor, you have to make the best read you can. You talk to your attorney general and say, where is the world headed? And is it reasonable for me to expend our precious resources fighting a cause that might be whose day has set? You look at this 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and what happened with the Supreme Court of the United States just this week. It's hard to make a case for the continuation of the governor's policy. And I think at some point, you have to agree to disagree and move on. For me, this is a fairly straightforward and civil rights question. You cannot deny one that is offered to anyone else. We are a nation of equal citizens, and there are no second-class citizens in this country, in this state. And I welcome the day when that is truly, truly applied to all citizens.
Mr. Wills, your rebuttal.
Interestingly, this is one of the very few issues that there's a difference between Governor Meade and Mr. Gosar. My position is that marriage is a historical institution of religious, natural, and common law, and therefore the marriage is between a man and a woman. If I was king, which the governor is not, I would make it not be something that needed to be licensed. Why do you need to be licensed to do something that you're going to do in your church? That's ridiculous. That said, what we've got that's coming down the road here is black-robed judges sitting in Washington, D.C. or someplace that are going to make law in Wyoming overriding the will of the people. And if the will of the people is that marriage is between a man and a woman, that's none of the business of the federal government. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution has meaning, and I will defy the federal government in this area and many others in areas where the federal government has no authority. Thank you.
Mr. Cousins.
I was not put here on this earth to be a judge of what others do. When they asked me to consider being the Libertarian candidate for governor, I said, I must have my autonomy. I must maintain my belief systems. I cannot compromise those things. For marriage or intimacy or relationships or partnerships, I think that is up to the individuals. They have their agency to choose which path they wish to follow. In a free country that we live in, we allow them freedom of choice. It's called free agency. My personal feelings are, I'll keep them to myself because I seem to be rather happy doing what I'm doing. But as far as others are concerned, I will not judge, I will not interfere.
And Governor Meade.
Well, obviously the situation is now the 10th Circuit has ruled on the states that were involved in the federal lawsuit. The Supreme Court has refused to take that up at this point. There's two different lawsuits, though. There's also the state lawsuits, which challenges Wyoming's laws based upon the Wyoming Constitution, which is different than the federal lawsuits, which is based upon the federal Constitution. Having said that, the state process is continuing, but we will see if there's a difference between the 10th Circuit opinion and the 6th Circuit opinion, and if so, then the U.S. Supreme Court, I suspect, would take that up, and we'll see what the decision is going to be. But to Mr. Gosar's point in terms of, end it. I don't have the ability as governor, and governors shouldn't have the ability to just say, you know what, I'm declaring something unconstitutional. The process has to continue. Obviously, as we look at the 10th Circuit opinion, I think it is so that the 10th Circuit, and maybe the other circuits as well, that same-sex couple marriage, that's what looks like where the courts are going to be going.
I'm going to roll it back just a second here, and I want a one-word answer, and we'll go down the line. Are you in favor of gay marriage in Wyoming? Yes or no? We'll start over here. Mr. Cousins.
Yes?
Yes.
No.
No.
Thank you. And Mr. Wills, the next question is for you. The state of Wyoming is engaged in a series of legal battles with the EPA over new federal environmental rules. Is that the right approach for Wyoming on these issues? Why or why not?
The EPA is just one of dozens of federal agencies that are severely overstepping both their constitutional authority and even their statutory authority. With regard to the EPA, I assume what you're talking about is the CO2 emissions rulings that are going to close coal-powered plants and cut down on the amount of coal that Wyoming gets to produce because there isn't going to be any place for it to be burned. So the point is, did the EPA overstep its authorities with regard to either the U.S. Constitution or the statute that gave it the authority to regulate particulate emissions, for example? And my answer to that is, within the legal framework, yes. The only reason they're doing it is because Obama was elected president and he decided he didn't like fossil fuels. And so he and Al Gore got together and decided that they were going to go on a crusade to get rid of fossil fuels. Nothing to do with what the wording of the law, the federal law that enabled the EPA to have any authority over it. And that's the problem that we have now. And we have it at both the state and federal level. It's worse at the federal level, but it exists at the state level. And that is that the legislature, the legislators, enact these bills and laws that give all the authority to the bureaucrats. And then the bureaucrats run amok. Good example is in the Department of Education here. Basically, when an open-ended checkbook is written with a wording that says, and the regulations shall be written by Health and Human Services or the EPA or whatever, you're just setting up for a tyranny. And we're living in that tyranny now, and it's going to get worse unless we push back.
Mr. Cousins.
EPA, administrative agencies. There's 25 or more of them that are appointed by the White House, Mr. Obama and specifically. Of those 25 agencies, you've got Department of Health, you've got the Department of Interior, we go on down the list, EPA being one of them. And what was said over here, the fact is that they do write their own policies and procedures. It becomes administrative law. They have their own administrative courts. They have their own administrative judges. And what bothers me is they write their regulations and then they come back to rule on their regulations through their own courts. I say anything that has to do of a penalty of any sort should be run through our judicial system and leave administrative law out of it. That's what causes our problems. That's why you have a 2,000-page ACA document.
And Governor Mead.
Well, obviously, I have strong views on this. I think we have 12 or 13 lawsuits against the EPA, not just on the 111D rule, but also in terms of them changing state jurisdiction on the Wind River Indian Reservation. And I do so not to be just litigious, but I do so because I think it's important for Wyoming on things that are critical for our quality of life and for our economy for us to stand our ground. when the EPA can come in and say your state jurisdiction has changed and let you know that after the fact, that's a problem. That's a regulatory agency doing that. And so while we try to work, and we do work with federal agencies as we can, when they do that, by caveat and just say this is the way it's going to be, they need to be challenged. And we've been active in challenging them because for too long, I think if you sit on the sidelines, you wake up one morning and you say, what's happening and why is this so in our state and why is this so across the country? And so I have been and I will be continue to be very aggressive in making sure what is best for Wyoming is protected. And when they cross the line and change jurisdiction, for example, we will litigate.
Mr. Gosar.
I think this is an easy question to answer because I do believe we're over litigious. We're involved in a lawsuit in Idaho that the state of Idaho is not involved in. And I think that there needs to be a cost-benefit analysis. What are we getting for what are we spending? And I think sometimes, maybe most times, it's better to sit down at the negotiating table and try that first. You know, I've heard a lot of discussion about the boundary issue. That might have been taken care of early on by the state and the Native American tribes before it ever got to court. And I think that that's something that needs to be understood, that court should be your last option, not your first. And that every time you enter court, you enter knowing that you can lose and that your outcome might not be the outcome that happens at the court. And so I think it behooves you to take your future in your hands, work with people and say, these are the points that we need to not exceed. And if we can get a negotiated settlement, great. And
I know the Posies, I know the Fridays, I know Mr. Redmond. I used to play basketball against him. But I don't think the majority of the tribe really agrees with the EPA's gift, so to speak. I think if you sit down, and they're having difficulty right now as far as keeping their council together. I don't know, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that really I guess I would call them the working class of the tribe, really have had an opportunity to really look at that closely. I don't think they want all the responsibility that may be dropped on them by the EPA. So that's a short statement, but that's where I am.
Governor Mead.
Well, of course, the EPA decision, it wasn't a time for a negotiation. EPA did it and then told us after the fact. There wasn't a lot of time to sit down and negotiate it. But the fact is, with the tribes, one of the things I started when I became governor is I travel up there and meet with the Joint Business Council. I have the Joint Business Council come down and meet with me. I met with the Eastern Shoshone Leadership Council just several days ago. Had a conversation with the chairman of Northern Arapaho last week. We have a good relationship, a working relationship, and we agree and disagree on certain items, but we have that continued dialogue that I think has been helpful for them and certainly for me. And while there's disagreements and agreements, they recognize that is going to be the case. We're not always going to agree on everything. But we have to have that opportunity to sit down, as we do, at the table and discuss areas of mutual concern and areas where we can work together. The area that I think we have great promise on is in terms of water and what we can do for water projects on the reservation and off the reservation, and as well as tourism and other economic activities. So it's a good relationship that we have, even though there's disagreements.
Mr. Gosar.
Well, I think that if there was no time for negotiation, it wouldn't have made much sense for the tribes to ask for a stay after the EPA ruling. And I think that that's just misleading. So how do you get people, Wyoming citizens, remember, to work with you? Well, you go out and meet with them. And I've been out there 3 times. And you don't meet with them just for the cameras and then leave. You go ask and you walk around. And you talk to people. And you see the problems in their health care facility. And you look at their school districts. And you wonder why there's no economic development. And then they'll ask you. And I think that's important to remember. They're Wyoming citizens first. And sometimes we have not treated them as Wyoming citizens. And I think you start at the basis of that. Mutual respect breeds mutual respect. And I think you start at that fundamental level.
Mr. Wills.
I think this is terrible. The EPA is using the tribes in the Wind River Reservation, try saying that fast, that they're using them as pawns in their battle with the state of Wyoming. And that's awful. That's typical of the federal government approach to things. From my understanding on the outside, Governor Meade's description of what took place is absolutely spot on. They basically came in and said, this is the way it shall be, and there was no negotiation. The reality is, yes, you try to sit down and negotiate, and you try to talk through, and then you go to lawsuits if you don't have any resolution there. But then the question is, what do you do if that doesn't work? If you know you're on strong constitutional grounds, but you're in limbo, like with the wolf issue, you basically have to say no to the federal government at some point in time. Not all the time, but there are going to be instances where we just have to tell them to butt out.
Thank you. And at this time, I'd like to offer a special thank you to Casper Star-Tribune opinion editor Jeremy Fugelberg, news production manager Mandy Burton, and you, the audience, for submitting a bunch of great follow-up questions tonight. We only have time for 4, and so Governor Meade, that first follow-up question is for you. And a reminder, you're going to get 2 minutes to answer, but then everybody else is going to get just 30 seconds for a rebuttal this time around, so keep that in mind. And Governor Meade, explain your change of positions on Medicaid expansion. First you opposed it, and now you seem less opposed. What happened? Why? Walk us through that process.
When I first became governor, that was one of the first lawsuits we had against the ACA. I thought it was bad policy, and I thought it was unconstitutional. We lost the case in terms of constitutionality. But as you will look at the state addresses go, what I said is, we can shake our fists, but it is the law of the land. We need to look at it. It's been described by some of the opponents here that I have changed, but look at 2 state addresses ago, and what I said is, we're going to look at it, and we have looked at it. But as we have not taken it, we have also seen the federal government become much more amenable in terms of flexibility for the states. If we would have jumped on board when some would have us jump on board just because it's a federal program, we wouldn't be in the position we are now. So where we are is what I have said. We're going to look and see what the best deal available is for Wyoming, see whether we give a thumbs up or thumbs down, be presented to the legislature, and then we'll go forward. But to say that we're just going to accept it or at any time just accept it just because it's a federal program is not the right way to go. Because the bottom line is, as we look at it and we see the exchange and we see people having trouble getting on the exchange, as we see in some places a net difference where people are actually losing insurance, those things need to be considered. Currently we have a little over 15,000 people who fall in the gap. They're working hard, but they don't make enough money to get health care, but they make too much money to be on traditional Medicaid. We have to take those into account. We have to take into account the money that is going to other states that would come to Wyoming, which is, I think, roughly 80 million plus. We have to take into account that our hospitals collectively in this state have about $200 million in uncompensated care every year. And that's not just eaten, that's passed on to all of us. And so to say that we have changed back and forth, it's just not so. The fact is, I objected to it. I thought it was bad policy. But 2 states ago, I said, that's the law of the land. Now we need to see what we can do. And that's what we've been working on the last year, is to see what flexibility can we get a waiver program from the Department of HHS and see if it is a good fit for Wyoming.
Mr. Gosar, your rebuttal.
2 words, election year. And if we filled this stadium with those 18,000 folks, I wonder if the governor would be talking about money and not about a person's health. Those are 2 long years, and people's health have been impacted. And it's just amazing to me that when we talk about health care, the governor always talks about money and never about people. And this is a good deal. It's been a good deal for 2 years, and it's time the governor realizes it's a good deal.
Mr. Wills.
I'm the only person on this stage who is opposed to Medicaid expansion unequivocally. It is a bad deal. It is essentially giving to the federal government complete control for deciding who gets what, How much it costs will be completely out of our control. In year one, they tell us they're going to pay for it all, but in year two, it decreases by 10%. Quite frankly, any waivers they give us are completely not in the law. I don't trust the federal government in a lot of things, but in this area, Obama has broken his own law in dozens of situations, and I don't trust him here, so I won't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
And Mr. Cousins.
This has been such a scam. From the very beginning, I remember when Medicare went into effect. I happen to be an administrator. I've been doing this stuff for 35 years. What you get from the White House right now, you just darn near have to bob and weave and stay with it, because it's not designed to really give us better care. Yeah, they're spreading it out, but the bottom line is to begin rationing health care to those who need it.
Thank you. Mr. Gosar, the second follow-up question is for you. Should Wyoming legalize medical marijuana or marijuana in general? Why or why not?
Well, I think that it's important, as a guy whose sister is a doctor, to not take one of those opportunities and one of those care abilities away from our professionals in healthcare. I met a gentleman in Casper not 2 weeks ago. He said, Pete, you know, I've had debilitating rheumatoid arthritis since I was 11, and the drugs no longer work. I've lost part of my colon and part of my stomach, and I have no options. I'd love to stay in my state, and I'd love to have a professional allow me to try marijuana. I don't want to break the law, but I'm running out of options. And I think if you would have seen him, you would understand he was telling the truth. And I think when we don't look at people, and we don't look at situations, and we continue to go on old wives' tales and things of the past, we make bad decisions. And so I support legalization of medical marijuana. I think it makes perfect sense to have our healthcare providers have every opportunity and every arrow in their quiver to manage a person's care. In some places, that's the only thing that will work. And I don't believe in the further legalization of marijuana at this time. I think you have an opportunity to do medical marijuana and find out the pros and cons. And then you can watch Colorado and see what's happened. Their system's brand new, and it's hard to make really any legitimate decisions based on what they've experienced. And so I think you go slow and you work to legalize medical marijuana.
Mr. Wills.
I'm absolutely in favor of medical marijuana. Do I get 30 seconds or 10? 3. I got 3 now. I'm absolutely in favor of medical marijuana. For heaven's sakes, we give, through prescription, opiates, really, really addictive drugs to people because they actually are useful medically. My mom died of MS in her 40s, and she suffered very badly. And I know that medical marijuana has been said to be very helpful for MS. And so I would absolutely, I'm in favor of legalizing medical marijuana. With regard to recreational, I have no position. I don't think we should probably make any change right now.
Mr. Cousins.
If there's a nurse in the place, they can correct me if I'm wrong, medical marijuana is already being prescribed. It's the weed, man, that they're talking about. It's the weed. You can get a prescription for a liquid or tablet of marijuana tomorrow if the doctor says that you need it. We dispense it in the facility I work in, and it seems to help people. But it is prescribed. It's either tablet or liquid form.
Governor Mead.
Well, I'm against medical marijuana. Recognize this, there's already a synthetic form of the active ingredient in marijuana, which is THC, which can be controlled and it can be prescribed. But medical marijuana, what is the dosage you're taking when you're smoking the pipe or the joint? What is the content? What's in there? It's amazing to me that FDA spends years and years approving a drug, and you have growers all over the place who say, take this and it will help you. It's not the way to go, and you see recently, even the governor of Colorado, in terms of legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes, said it's reckless. But where did they start? They started with medical marijuana, so I'm against it.
Thank you. Mr. Wills, the third follow-up question is for you. The difference between men's and women's wages in Wyoming is among the largest in the nation. Do you consider this a problem? And if so, how do you propose to use our state government to address this issue?
There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. The reality is everybody in this room knows that men typically go for the very dangerous jobs in the coal fields, in the oil fields, and the statistics that end up with the question that Mr. Adrian's asked do not take into account the difference in the workforce and in the jobs that are being done and in the experience of the people who are doing those jobs. So I reject the question as not being on strong footing with regard to the question itself. That said, I'm absolutely in favor of making sure that everybody is treated fairly in this state, and equal laws that say that equal pay for exactly the same work, that's fine. We have lots of labor laws that probably address that. But that's not what the question is implying, and so I reject the basis of the question.
Fair enough. Mr. Cousins, your rebuttal.
I've worked with women for a long time, and I think they should be paid equally as any man. You put 10 ladies out there and give them a job to do, and put 100 men out there, and I'll tell you, the ladies will get it done. I'm sorry. They should be, in my profession, in hospitals and long-term care, assisted living, they are paid on an equal basis with men.
Governor Mead.
There's no question that we have industry in Wyoming that historically has been male-dominated, and that does add to it. But the fact is we do have a gap, a wage gap, and it's all sectors. It's not just those heavy sectors. The fact is we have done a little better, but it is historically not something Wyoming has done well in, and we do need to do better. And so when Workforce Services provides grants, for example, the McMurray Training Center to provide some of the training to females in that area, or Sage Trucking gets grants from Workforce Services, or when our colleges provide training to females in some of those areas, that'll help, but it's slow. But I will say this, part of it is leadership. And in my office, for example, I have more females than males. And some of the top, in fact, my top staff are females. And so we have to lead by example as well.
And Mr. Gosar.
Well, I think this is a central platform for me. And Mr. Cousins probably hasn't experienced wage gap inequality because he's not who we're talking about. And certainly there's a wage gap in Wyoming, and when you strip out all the choice of job, choice of education, choice of family, every choice, there's still a wage gap in Wyoming and throughout the country. And so what do you attribute it to? Certainly there has to be an unequal pay for equal work. Certainly there's some discrimination in hiring or advancing practices. And the governor's had 4 years at this, and it's not meaningfully changed. And so it's nice to hear him talk about it, and I agree with him entirely, but words speak louder.
Thank you. The final follow-up question tonight is from Mr. Cousins, and Mr. Cousins, you'll be happy to know that somebody in the audience has asked a question about wolves.
With a reporter about that.
Here's the question. A federal judge has put Wyoming's wolf management plan on hold. What should the state's response be to that decision?
Well, if you're really interested in the elk population continuing so we can go hunting, or the moose population to continue so you can go hunting, and you don't have wolves out assisting the cow elk deliver her cow or her calf, I'm sorry. Wolves are predators. Wolves are predators. They know they'll chew on anything you put out there. Send them back to Canada. I don't want to shoot them either.
Governor Meade, your rebuttal.
Well, hard to rebut. Obviously disappointed in the Wolf decision. Secretary Salazar and I, working together one-on-one with sportsmen's groups across the state, with conservation groups, ranchers, farmers, we came up with what was a great plan. And in fact, the wolves have been recovering quite steadily. And in fact, the judge recognized they've been recovering. What needs to happen is we need to fix the Endangered Species Act. And in the immediate term, what we need to do is we need a congressional fix, because it is not working when we have a plan that is increasing the number of wolves, when we've done it responsibly, and still a judge from afar says no deal.
Well, sir. Sir.
Well, from my understanding, we got into trouble because the basis of our argument and our delisting was a non-binding arrangement. We had 2 years to make that binding, and to have it come at the emergency rules at the 11th hour made it look like we had mismanaged this. We had spent a lot of time, we had to spend a lot of money and a lot of effort on this. Idaho and Montana's plans are still going forward. The question has to be asked, why aren't ours? Why wasn't ours made non-binding? Why didn't we put in that extra time and effort to make sure that that plan was consummated?
And Mr. Wills.
This is a slam dunk for me. We need to defy that black robe judge in Washington, D.C. We need to start the wolf hunt tomorrow. The timing of this thing was so suspicious. It was the final decision was the day before the trophy wolf hunt was supposed to start. If that isn't politics, I don't know what is. I don't trust the federal government, and again, I'll say this one more time. Sometimes you just have to say no to the federal government.
Thanks to the four of you for everything tonight. And based on results of a pre-debate lottery, Mr. Gosar will be allowed to make the first closing statement of the night. 2 minutes for everybody. Mr. Gosar, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you all. And I appreciate you coming out, and thanks to the Casper Star and Casper College. And Jason, thank you very much. What a wonderful opportunity. I think we have a decision to make, and it's a decision about the future. And where would you like to lead, and where would you like to go? Would you like the status quo with 2 sets of rules, one for the insiders and one for everybody else? Would you like to bank on your future on science that's censored, a UW that cannot put art, cannot talk free speech, and is academically not as free as it should be? Does that bode your future well? Should you cut your budgets on the backs of your employees and watch your highway patrolmen leave in droves? And should you take care to make sure that 3 out of your 4 herds will always be in decline when you cut habitat, access, and hunter programs? That's the future that we're headed for. But we don't have to choose it. There's a different future, a future that looks at the challenges and sees opportunities, a future that opens the doors wide of the governor's office and says, you know, your voice and your vote is always respected. In my campaign, every Wednesday night, I take questions live for 2 hours, and it's important. It's made me a better candidate, and I hope it's provided access, because in the technology of today, we're breaking the barriers down between those who govern and those whom they govern for. And we have a real opportunity in Wyoming. We have a real opportunity to lead in healthcare. We have a real opportunity to set the standard in education. And we can be better. There is valuable resources in our human beings in Wyoming, and they're untapped. We have the opportunity to present a future that's worthy of their work. Time's wasting. Let's get on with it.
Thank you. Mr. Wills.
Well, I agree with Mr. Gosar on one thing. There's 2 classes of people in this state. There's the good old boy network, and there's the rest of us. What I disagree with Mr. Gosar is that he's part of the rest of us. If you guys don't know this, Mr. Gosar's job is being pilot for Mr. Meade on the 2 corporate jets that fly around the leadership of the state of Wyoming. And in return for that, Mr. Meade appointed Mr. Gosar to the very powerful State Board of Education in 2011. So for Mr. Gosar to come up here and say he's not part of the good old boy network, I'm rejecting that. I don't buy that. I'm not part of the good old boy network. I'm a complete outsider, okay? I don't have anybody that is going to come to me and say, would you please take care of this for me because you got to pay me back for some favor that they've done for me in the past. I'm really an independent. I will be an independent. I will represent the rest of us. And I think if you look real close, you'll recognize that there really isn't a whole lot of difference between Mr. Gosar and Mr. Meade. They really are the good old boy network, the progressives that continue to spend more money. We've been growing like crazy under both Democratic and Republican governors over the last decade, and we're going to continue to, whether or not Mr. Gosar or Mr. Meade is elected. Common Core, you're going to have Common Core if Mr. Gosar or Mr. Meade is elected. Medicaid expansion, you're going to have Medicaid expansion if Mr. Meade or Mr. Gosar is elected. And for you Republicans who voted for Taylor Haynes and Cindy Hill, I strongly recommend you consider voting for me, because voting for Meade is voting for the same old, and I won't go there. I will be an independent, I will be frugal, and I will be conservative, and I will be answerable to the not good old boy network.
Mr. Cousins.
Excuse me. How long does it take us to say the Pledge of Allegiance? We didn't do that, did we? I've made this thing a matter of prayer. First thing I would do as governor, I'd walk into the office and I would call all of the department directors somewhere. There's a meeting room large enough for that, and we'd have a discussion. They are stewards of their various departments, and to my knowledge, with few exceptions, they're doing a great job for the state of Wyoming. I would not want to diminish them in any way, shape, or form. We can do better than what the federal government does for us. Now, on the federal government's side, however, they are grossly overstaffed with department after department, from agency to agency, and they get phenomenally good salaries. Our folks are compensated, I think, fairly. I think your highway patrolmen we need to take a second look at them. And we need to build up we need to be vigilant. We need to be prepared. The first sentence in our Constitution says that the state, is in charge of providing security for its citizens. That begins with law enforcement. We've got to have them vigilant, prepared, and ready. If you haven't noticed, folks, we're at war. People are getting killed. If you don't think it's coming home to rest, think again. Your law enforcement people are very concerned about it. The corridors, the highways are the corridors that come through our state. We have questionable characters come through every day. And our law enforcement people put their lives on the line for that. Maybe there's some hazardous pay we should consider for those folks. We're 36 troopers short from what normally they're budgeted for. I know most of them, or a lot of them, but I only have 2 tickets so far this year. Okay. But I did receive a letter from one, and it was very well structured. I verified that the data was correct. We need to shore up ourselves and be supportive of those people we elect. But our people that we elect must live by the test of conscience. That's all I have to say.
And Governor Meade.
Well, thank you. Again, thanks for putting this on. Thank you, all of you, for attending. You know, we've gone through this debate and be able to have the opportunity to hear from all of us. I would tell you I'm a little disappointed in Mr. Wills and Mr. Gosar and sort of the cynicism they have about Wyoming and the cynicism about people involved in Wyoming, where we are and where we're going. You know, when you start saying there's a group over here that's this way and there's a group over here that is this way, That's sort of I guess it's class warfare or us against them sort of system. We see where that's gotten Washington, D.C. We see where that's gotten the current president in trying to do that. Wyoming's better than that. We're the smallest state in terms of population. In some ways, we're like a big family. We can agree and we can disagree, but we recognize that the strength in Wyoming isn't some of us, it's all of us. And when I started, for example, the 10-year plan on how to address homelessness in Wyoming, I didn't do it for political reasons, but because I care about all the citizens in Wyoming. And when I hear people go on and you're this group or you're that group, you know, that's not the way we are in Wyoming. The fact of the matter is the state's in good shape. There is challenges and mistakes that are always made and they will continue to be made. But we lead by setting an example. And when I see that, for example, Mr. Wills is talking about Wyoming and not being able to bring anybody from his company here, or when I hear Mr. Gosar talk about dividing the people, that's not the way we should go forward. We should recognize this. We are a strong state. We're getting stronger. We have the ability to work with one another. We have the ability to disagree and agree in remarkable ways. But when you only have 580,000 plus people, we can't throw up these barbs that prevent us that opportunity to work together. We all have to have our shoulder to the wheel to work together. It's been an incredible honor to represent Wyoming. And one of the reasons that is so is because this collective way that Wyoming moves forward, even when we disagree. That's what I want to see continue, for Wyoming to be strong in that way in all ways. Thank you for the time tonight.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes tonight's first debate. A special thanks to Casper College for hosting, and to the gubernatorial candidates, thank you so much for your participation this evening. Please remember to make your way to the separate media area for short interview sessions with reporters after this. And to our audience, if you plan on leaving before the start of the Superintendent of Public Instruction debate, now's the time to do so. Have a good evening, drive safe. Remember to vote on November 4th. If you'd like to stay for the next debate, please be back in your seats before 8:05. Thank you.